I'd like to start this event by acknowledging the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation, on whose lands Writing New South Wales is situated. I pay respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands where you're joining us from today. Please feel free to make your own acknowledgement of country in the chat box if you'd like to do that. I now welcome Fiona Hazard, Group Publishing Director for Hachette Australia and New Zealand. Fiona has over 25 years of experience in publishing gained both here and in the UK. As well as overseeing Hachette's Australia and New Zealand publishing programs, she also publishes her own list of fiction and non-fiction, including best-selling and award-winning authors such as Geraldine Brooks and Dr. Michael Mosley. Fiona leads Hachette's partnerships with the State Library of Queensland's Black and White program and the Emerging Writers Festival, was a co-founder of Hachette's annual literary prize and for emerging and unpublished writers, the Ritual Prize, and sits as the trade publisher representative on the Australian Inclusive Publishing Initiative, a cross-industry body established to increase access for readers with print disabilities. She's also the board sponsor for Hachette's Changing the Story employee network, Thrive, which aims to build cultural awareness, bring people together and champion colleagues and writers from underrepresented backgrounds. My goodness, that's a lot. Welcome, Fiona. It's lovely to have you join us today.
Thanks so much, Rowena, and thanks for the invitation. And I'm very happy to be here. I'm in the Hachette office today, which is situated on Gadigal land, and we're right next door to the lovely Barangaroo and in the thick of the Vivid Festival. Yes, so great place to be.
Beautiful spot. Now, I know there are so many people joining us in the Zoom today who are very keen to hear about the Ritual Prize, and we'll certainly chat about that later, but I'd like to start with some background about you, Fiona. Were you a big reader as a young person, or a big writer even?
I was a big reader. So I grew up in the northwest of England, near the Lake District, actually, and spent quite a lot of time exploring the Lake District. So Beatrix Potter, it's a very formative part of my early years, and Arthur Ransom's Swallows and Amazons, and the Wordsworth country. So I suppose it was very rich in a literary sense. But I also, both of my grandmothers were huge readers and used to actually lend me lots of books, and I would do the Saturday morning library. So I was an avid reader and read quite broadly, and English was not very much passion at school, and from there I went to university across the other side of the country and did an English and history degree. So I suppose my writing has always been, in terms of, I've never written much fiction. I'm not a writer myself, if that makes sense. I have huge admiration for people who can sit down and be so disciplined as to write whole books. So yeah, that's a bit about the background. And then actually from there, when I left university, I moved to London and started working in publishing there. And I actually entered the industry through the production side, which was lots of fun. And I worked for a legal publisher to start with, which was back in the days of loose leaf volumes, which was quite interesting. And then I moved into children's and educational. So I had lots of sort of varied experience about lots of different types of publishing. And then I came over to Australia and got a job here, and ended up staying here. So I've been here a long time now, more than 20 years. And I was actually a fan of Australian literature even when I lived in England. So things like Oscar and Lucinda, Peter Carey, there was that sort of start that's probably sort of in the 90s when Australian literature became more accessible in other parts of the world. So yeah, it's been fun. And then I've been at Hachette in a few different guises, actually, because it was previously Hotter Headline. And then the company was bought by Hachette, which is a French-owned company, back in 2005. And we started to really focus on growing our Australian list, probably in the early 2010s. We'd always had quite a big children's list, but we then moved into developing the adult side more. And as part of that, Hachette changeover. Lothian Books, which is a Melbourne-based publishing company, which has been around since the late 1870s, became part of the business as well. So it's sort of gone from there. So I've been in this role for the last sort of 10 years or so. But publishing just evolves all the time. So people sort of, when I think, well, I've been in this job for so long, how, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I just think that at all points in time, there's something changing. There's a new way of reaching audiences. People have different tastes. So yeah, it's an ever evolving landscape, really. So yeah.
And we'll talk about that evolution a little later on in the conversation. I know there's going to be plenty of people in the Zoom joining us today who are keen for a career in publishing. Could you share your thoughts on what a career like that, how that might look, or what sort of roles there are in a publishing house, just at a top level?
Sure. So I'd just say, when I went to university, which is clearly a long time ago, it was at the very start of publishing specific degree courses, certainly in the UK. And I know here, there's a lot of postgrad courses. So I'd say that a lot of people that we get applying for roles right across the company have done those postgraduate publishing courses. And I would say that whilst that's great, if that's something that you want to do, it's absolutely not a prerequisite in our eyes for someone applying for a job. It's much more about somebody showing their passion and enthusiasm for the industry and being a really voracious reader and being really in touch with contemporary culture, I think, as well. So, making sure that you're watching certain TV shows or you're reading the news, to be a really well-rounded person who's aware of what's going on in the world is probably more important, because the part of the business that is publishing is what we can teach you when you get here. So I'd say don't be put off. Don't be put off by that at all. We run an internship program, a summer internship program, which we run through December, January, February, and encourage people to apply for that. And there's also an incredible industry program called Open Book, which just launched last year as well, which is to encourage people from underrepresented backgrounds to apply. And similarly, that's a 3-month paid internship, and there's 3 people. They select 3 people, and they work with different publishing houses. So we were part of that last year, and we'll do it again in the future. So there's definitely, I'm speaking more, for Hachette than for other houses, but there are certainly opportunities. And for us, though, that internship program is paid. So I think from our perspective, we don't run unpaid internships anymore, because I think those days have gone. And yes, and then we advertise broadly. We advertise roles as much as we can through our Friends with Emerging Writers Festival or Black and White program, on Indigenous employment websites as well. So we're trying to make sure that we're sharing those job ads when they come up as broadly as we can.
I might get you to elaborate a little bit on some of those partnerships and very important initiatives around inclusion. So can you tell us a little bit more about these and any other movements in the industry that you've observed, any other changes in publishing over the years?
Well, look, I think, I don't think any publisher would sit down today and say that we haven't acknowledged that there is an issue of representation more broadly. I mean, it's a very white, very female-dominated industry, and that's something that we are really actively trying to change. And I think it's something that's happening at a slower pace than anybody would like it to, which is kind of interesting in itself. So we work really closely with the State Library of Queensland's Black and White program, and that program is twofold. So the first part of it is actually a writing fellowship, which they will award to 2 Indigenous or Torres Strait Islanders to help them develop their work and get that published. And we work with those writers to publish those books. And then they also have an editorial component to it where they select 2 Indigenous or Torres Strait Islander editors to work with them and be trained under the guidance of the amazing Grace Lucas Pennington up there. And we partner with them. We've actually got the 2 trainees this year coming in next week, which is quite overdue as they got delayed because of COVID. So they're going to spend a week in the office with our editorial team and talk to lots of the other members, lots of different teams within the organisation, and get a feel. So they spend that time actually working on the manuscripts from the fellows, but we ask them to join editorial meetings, and if we've got training going on, we would get them to participate. So that's one thing that we're doing. And then we've also got a publishing trainee program running this year for the first time. So that lady joined in January this year, and throughout the 12 months that she's with us, we're basically giving her an overview of everything that goes on, primarily in the publishing team, so across the editorial, design and production. But she's also going to spend 2 weeks with literary agency Curtis Brown, and she actually already works in a bookshop, so that bookshop element would also be a component, but she's actually quite an experienced bookseller, so she had that base covered already. And then Open Book is separate to Hachette, but that's something we might put a link in the chat for that, but people can apply to that, and there are a panel of people who assess those applications. And then, you know, I think with both Black and White and Open Book, the aim is that once people have been through those programs, that they will be able to get employment in the industry. So that's sort of the next sort of evolution of that. And then at Hachette, we mentioned before, we have Changing the Story initiative, which our CEO in the UK, David Shelley, set up. And that's really about us trying to do as much as we can positive action. So we have a number of committees within Hachette. I look after the Thrive committee, which is about, again, making sure that we are as inclusive in the workplace as we can be, but also that we publish as diversely as possible. So those sort of two sides go together, but it's about, in the workplace, it's not just about the books and the authors that we publish. It's about, you know, which religious holiday are we celebrating this week? Have you explored literature from this particular author? And I should say too, we share our floor with the Indigenous Literacy Foundation, which is amazing because we now have got this lovely sort of very easy flow of communication back and forth, and they have amazing library boxes that you can buy. Again, we might be able to find the chat for that organisations can buy for their workplaces, that has a selection of books by Indigenous authors, so that you can say to your colleagues, you know, you might not have read a book from an Indigenous author before. Here's the box of books, you know, go and borrow a copy and bring it back next week. So I think that's also amazing what they're doing. So.
Well, Hachette seems like it's a lovely place to work. I saw it was recently included in the Australian Financial Review and Boss Magazine's Best Places to Work Award. How fabulous. You must be pleased about that.
It was very nice, very gratifying to be included in that. And actually the category we were in, I'm just looking at my notes here, was retail, hospitality, tourism and entertainment, which is quite broad. So to get a place in the top 10, we were really delighted about that.
So we've talked a little bit there about some of the new voices that we're hearing, and I'm curious to know how responsive readers have been to new voices in the marketplace.
Yes, good question. Yes, but I think they could be more responsive, and I think certainly at the moment, you know, when we're in the midst of cost of living pressures, economic challenges, certainly what we see in those times is that people feel less likely to try a new author, or something different. They very much fall back on the books that perhaps they've heard about from their friends that they've never had the time to read, or those sort of best-selling authors that they would always just go out and buy. So in terms of breaking out new voices, it's a difficult time to do that. So I think just sort of saying to readers, please give these new authors a go, particularly if you yourself want to be a writer, because we need to support that ecosystem. We need to support Australian writers very much. We need to buy their books or borrow them from libraries or listen to the audios, because we can only make a decision to publish a book if we know there's an audience of a reasonable size. And I think, you know, that what's determined as a reasonable size varies from publisher to publisher. And I won't go into the details of it, but I think, you know, we really need to know that there's an audience there. And sometimes you can create that and you can build that word of mouth, but knowing that we've got the support of readers is really, really important. And I think the other thing that's changed over the last few years is that things like writers' festivals and events in bookshops, you know, people obviously they were on hiatus for a certain amount of time. And then even now, events, particularly in Sydney, it's just very hard to get people to go to events. You know, I think people are cautious, or they make last minute decisions not to go. And I think, you know, it's great to do things online, and thank you everyone for coming. But I think generally there is a little bit of a feeling of fatigue about some of that. So again, that sort of way of connecting authors with their readers has changed a little bit. And I don't feel that hasn't quite moved on to the next iteration of what that's going to be.
Yeah. I know that you mentioned there that people tend to rely on books that they've been, you know, friends have recommended them, or they're big names. But have you got a sense of any specific genres that are going to be the next big thing, or what readers have an appetite for at the moment?
Yeah, well, certainly fiction. Over the last few years, people have turned back to fiction because it's escapist. You know, we've all been living through horrible times, and certainly Book Talk, which I'll just, in case people don't know, so the TikTok platform, kind of out of that came a movement called Book Talk a couple of years ago, which is essentially teenage and young women uploading their own videos of books that they've enjoyed reading, very much in the romance, thriller, suspense territory, from around the world, to say, this is an amazing book, you should go out and buy it. And those videos very quickly went viral and essentially have kind of given rise to this Book Talk phenomenon. I think we have to say it's a phenomenon now. So authors like Colleen Hoover, and you can, if you went to your local bookstore or one of the discount department stores, you will just see that there are now so many of these books available for sale. So there's definitely been a massive push, massive increase in sales of those sorts of books, which is great. And as a big multinational company, we certainly have some of those authors on our list. But I suppose the other side of that is that it's, again, made it a little bit harder to break out new voices. But I think this is just the sort of the phase that publishing goes through, that there will be a sort of global moment that everyone jumps on that particular wagon, and then it will sort of have a moment where it will fade and something else will pop up. So it's just sort of riding the emotional wave that goes with that. But certainly, you know, the feedback we've heard is that fiction is still very much where people want to be in their reading. So we'll see what happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd like to remind the audience that if you have a question for Fiona, please pop it into the chat box for our Q&A at the end. So my next question, Fiona, is about debut authors. Is it difficult to get picked up by a publisher? Yes, is it difficult? I'm assuming yes. Yes. I mean, I always think it's a sort of a funnel, isn't it? You know, that there is a huge kind of funnel of ways that we
that we receive manuscripts. It might be through agents, it might be through somebody submitting to a prize, it might be through our manuscript submissions inboxes, which I'm saying in the chat, which are monitored, but not on a daily basis. It's probably more like a monthly basis. And so then those books go through a process that they would be allocated to a certain publisher. So there's 7 of us here, and each publisher has an area of specialization or specializations, and they would be reviewing those manuscripts and determining whether we thought there was an opportunity for us to publish them. And I wanted to emphasize that it's not necessarily the reasons why we would say no to something aren't necessarily because of the book or what the writing. There's so many factors involved. So I mean, it can often be about the shape of the list already, and which other authors we have on the list, because if we have a very similar author to a manuscript that's being proposed, then we're probably not going to take on somebody else who's very similar to someone we already publish. And sometimes it's about the level of sales that we think that we can achieve, or it might be in an area. I mean, some things like science fiction and fantasy are really interesting because lots of people when we do pitch sessions through things like the Society of Authors, I know a lot of people would pitch sci-fi and fantasy, but if you look at sales historically, all of the sales of all of the books are for international authors. So that the sales of books written by Australian authors are very, very small. So that sort of comes back to the point of if you want to see a category, you have to support that category. So it does ebb and flow, and a lot of what we do also is quite topical. And the way that the list is split, so fiction would probably be about 40% of what we publish, and then there's the children's list, and then the rest of it would be non-fiction, and that's taking us then into memoir and biography, history, true crime. So if you're thinking about the size and the overall shape of the list, already fiction is really probably less than half of it in some ways in terms of the number of books we're looking to acquire. Does that answer the question?
Look, it does. It does. What makes, I know it depends on your list and things like that, but what makes for a strong submission?
I think for us, originality is key. So you want to feel that it's fresh and that it's offering something new to readers.
Sure.
And we want to feel your burning desire to share this story. Absolutely. Make it interesting. Essentially, it's got to hook us in on the writing. You've absolutely got to hook us in on the writing. And yes, we will work editorially with an author to develop that manuscript and absolutely make it the best it can possibly be. But you've got to feel as soon as you read it that you're connecting with it, and that you want to sit down and read it. I mean, we're readers first and foremost. So if it doesn't grab us in the first sort of 10 or 20 pages, it's probably not going to, which I know is a hard thing to say, but you've really got to sort of make it absolutely the best it can be before you submit it, and then it's still going to go through a rigorous editorial process.
Well, that leads us nicely into the Ritual Prize. So can you tell us about how the prize came about and what it actually is?
Yes, I can. So the Ritual Prize actually came from a sad place, and we were talking about this week, our CEO, Matt Ritchell, tragically died in a surfing accident almost 10 years ago. And he had only been the CEO for 6 months, and was very passionate about new writers. His wife, Hannah Ritchell, is also an author. So he was very acutely aware of somebody trying to write who had a young family at the time, and how difficult it was to find the time, the headspace, and also the physical space. And we used to talk about that a lot. So it seemed only kind of fitting that we wanted to acknowledge his memory in some way, and the idea of creating a writing prize, which essentially gave someone the funds to have the time and space to write, was something that we felt was the essence of the prize. The prize is a $10,000 cash prize, and also a mentorship with our head of literary fiction, Vanessa Radnich. And then the other thing to say is that we're not asking someone to deliver a whole manuscript either, because I think we realize that that's also a barrier to entry for a lot of people. So we've basically said, write us 3 chapters, tell us, give us a synopsis for the rest of the work, and then tell us why winning the prize, how it's going to help further your career. So we wanted to make it absolutely as accessible as possible. So I think, even today, I wrote down the closing date is the 7th of July. I think I know people have said to me they've seen it, only a couple of weeks before the deadline, and they've thought, okay, I've had this in my head for so long, I'm just going to sit down this weekend and do those 3 chapters and write. So that's why we started it and how it works. And we're thrilled that coming up to the 10-year anniversary next year, which we'll definitely be making a milestone moment out of. And we've published already quite a number of books where the authors have either been the winners or shortlistees in the prize. So yeah, it's going well, and we're very proud of it. And the Ritchell family too are really, really proud of it. So yeah.
It's such a wonderful opportunity, and I hope that many people enter. As you heard, the applications close on the 7th of July. But who judges this? What are they?
What are they looking for?
How do we win?
Well, look, I do the chair of the judging, which I have to say is quite a stressful night, because it's often in the evening because Hannah's in the UK. So Hannah Ritchell and Vanessa Radnich both sit on the judging panel, and then we usually call in a couple of other judges from the bookselling community as well, to sit on that panel. So we usually have five judges all up. And to the points I've said before, it's really about, what catches their eye, what they think is the most original, something that we haven't seen before, all of the above, really. So
yeah.
I can't give you the magic formula.
Oh, damn it.
Unfortunately. I wish we could.
We all had our pens ready to make notes.
Yeah, I know.
In addition to those first 3 chapters of up to 20,000 words, applicants also submit a 1-page synopsis, a chapter breakdown of up to 2 pages, as well as a 750-word personal statement. Yeah. So how important are those supporting documents, and what will make them shine?
I think, look, they're helpful, but the writing is really what is the guiding light, because I think, that's what has to stand out for us. Obviously, look, there are a lot of reasons why somebody might want to win it. And I think I saw in the chat too, we want it to be as inclusive as possible. There's no age limit on the writer. We don't have any problem at all. That is not a factor in our decision making about who the winner might be. So yeah, we want it to be all inclusive.
Fabulous. And can all sorts of genres apply?
There are some exclusions, but I'm going to ask people to look at the Ritchell Prize link for that, because I don't want to say the wrong thing. And I would say it does sometimes vary from year to year in terms of the categories that we are seeking.
You've had some wonderful winners. Is winning everything? Are there other benefits to entering?
Well, you get the mentorship. That's a given. So you get to work on your manuscript for 12 months with one of the publishers here, which I think is invaluable. And I think there's a nice kind of alumni. As I said before, some of the shortlisted writers have gone on to have books published either with us or by other publishers. And I feel like it's becoming more and more acknowledged on the literary landscape. So even if it's not that book that you might decide to finish writing or to move on with, then I think it's the acknowledgement that if you have been either. We also published the long list for the prize as well for the same reason, so that we can say, you know, congratulations, this is how far, you know, you've done really well to get this far in the prize. And I just think, yeah, generally it has a really nice community sort of feel and aspect to it.
And certainly if you're shortlisted or longlisted, and if you're then pitching your work later, that's beneficial too.
Exactly.
Yeah. And perhaps even just the practice of writing a synopsis. All of those things.
Definitely.
Beneficial too.
Yeah.
So applications do close on the 7th of July. Before we move on, Fiona, did you have any other final thoughts on the Ritual Prize you wanted to share, other than, of course, strongly encouraging everyone to apply?
Good luck, and be brave and be bold is what we always say. and also I just honestly salute anybody who will sit down and write and give their heart and mind to that process, because I think it is brave and it is bold to sit down and write a story. And actually my last point that I did write is, don't defame anyone. So down to the nitty-gritties, because often people will say, this happened in real life. If I turn it into a novel, no one will know who I'm writing about. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And people will either see themselves or other people will recognize them. So think about that.
All right, so we will be moving on to audience questions shortly. So don't forget to pop your questions in the chat box. Fiona, you did mention that you do periodically take submissions. What are you looking for right now?
Again, that's a really difficult question, because
Sorry.
I don't. Oh, no, that's all right. I'll just answer it the best I can. I'm not going to say we're looking for something specific, because actually we're not. We're looking for fantastic submissions for exciting books. So that's as much as I can say on that question. I don't want to be prescriptive. Again, I will go back to the sci-fi fantasy is really hard. I think it's one of the things I wrote down in my notes was, you know, it's great to read in the genre that you're writing in, and read broadly and be aware of what's going on out in the book buying world. But at the same time, it's hard to be, you can't sort of write for a trend, because actually by the time that if your book is going to be published comes out, it could be 1 or 2 years ahead. So, you know, we work in an environment that's very fluid. So it's very hard to say right now, this is what I want now, because I'm not going to be able to publish anything I acquire now. I probably can't publish before the middle of next year anyway. And then the way the publishing calendar works, it is a little bit, I'm going into kind of the nitty-gritty sort of retail end of it. You know, there's definitely seasons and cycles. So, you know, January is New Year and New You, and then you've got Valentine's Day, and then there's Mother's Day and Father's Day and Christmas. So there is sort of, we do look at that calendar landscape as well when we're scheduling a book for it to be published. So
okay,
there's a few other things to, you know, there's a lot of things to sort of get taken into consideration. So I think trying to be that prescriptive is hard.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about what makes for a strong submission. Any thoughts on what not to do?
Oh gosh, don't plagiarize somebody else's work. Don't defame anyone. No, not really. I think you have to be really, really honest to yourself about what you're writing. You have to believe in it. And I think also you have to feel, and this is quite an important one for me, you have to feel comfortable speaking to that topic, because, you know, if your book does go on and get published and you have to talk about it, you know, as publishers, we want absolutely somebody who will be the face of their book. And, you know, will be happy and comfortable to talk at festivals, to talk on the radio. I think, you know, the knowing that you are really comfortable with what you've written about and can speak to it really well. And again, that side of the business can be quite exhausting and emotionally draining. So I always feel like you want to make sure someone feels really comfortable knowing that that's as much part of the process as anything else, because we need you as an author to be out in the world and in touch with your authors, probably more than that's ever been the case before. So I think you do have to feel committed to sort of that part of it as well, if you want your book to be published. And I think the other thing I was going to say is that, you know, you don't write, if you're a writer and you write every day in whatever form you do, that's amazing. You know, I don't think people should necessarily feel that to be at ease with that they have to have their book published either.
It's a good
you know,
point.
because sometimes I know I've read submissions where I can tell it's incredibly cathartic for someone that they've written their story down and they've shared it, but it might not be something that they would then feel comfortable sitting and talking in front of a crowded room about, or that there might be that many people who've shared a similar experience. So I think, you know.
And which new authors or books are you excited by and excited to read and excited to promote?
Oh, wow. Oh, that's like asking to choose one of your children.
Babies. I know.
That's a really good question, right? Well, I'm just going to say, because we had the Book Industry Awards last week, and I published Geraldine Brooks, and her novel Horse won the literary fiction category. So I'm incredibly excited and proud to have published that. And Geraldine's just such a global superstar, and she did reveal at one of her festival events that she has got a couple of new books in the works, which I can't say anything about, but she's very excited about that, and I'm going to be her publisher for those. So that's Hachette will be releasing them, so that's wonderful. And then it's sort of the other end of the scale of my list, as you said. Just worked with a lady called Melissa Levi, who's a psychologist, who has written a book about the conversations we need to have about aging. She was just on the Today Show this morning, I think. So that is very exciting. And then we just had our conference this week, so we've got an incredible lineup of authors for the end of this year, including an incredible book by a lady called Rochelle Unreich, who's written a memoir about her mother, who was a Holocaust survivor. So we've got, it's a really broad mixed book. So
Right. All right, look, I've just realized, my goodness, we've got so many questions in the chat. So I think we should probably now open it up to questions from the audience. Let's have a look here. Irina asks, what is the fate of literary fiction and non-fiction in the current publishing climate?
That's a good question. And I mean, again, I think it's cyclical. So our feeling is it's not something that we're going to stop acquiring, but certainly at the moment, the sales of those sorts of books are lower than they have been at other times. So I think we all, if we can, we all need to go out and support a literary fiction author, an Australian literary fiction author. Buy a book, borrow a book, recommend it to a friend, because that's the only way we can keep doing what we're doing.
Absolutely. Read and buy books. We've got a question here from Colleen. Colleen asks, I'm planning to submit my memoir for the Ritual Prize, but I've only done a first patchwork draft. Now working on the story structure draft for the Ritual Prize submission. Is such an early draft likely to be enough? It's a little bit up to Colleen, really, isn't it?
Well, it is, Colleen, yes, we're in your hands. I would say that it varies a little bit, but the entries sit between about 500 and 900 entries each year. So there is a big pool. But having said that, if you can draw us in and hook us in with the story, then it's not to say that we wouldn't pursue it through the judging rounds. But I think if you can, just try and make it as best as you possibly can. So it's worth, if you have the time, then spend the time.
Spend the time is right.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit earlier about book talk, and I know we're curious about author platforms and what authors need to do to increase their likelihood of getting published or getting picked up, particularly for a debut author. So Linda asks, what type of promotional platforms do you recommend as effective for authors, and which social media platforms are the most used at the moment?
Okay, well, TikTok obviously is growing in popularity. So I know a few of our authors have moved on to TikTok, and I'll give a little shout out to Sophie Green, who's also one of my authors up there. So she's doing regular TikTok posts, and also has just started a writing podcast. Instagram is very popular now. Facebook is still popular. I think Twitter is more of a kind of business to business communication, and some authors do still have websites and newsletters. So I mean, I would say if you want to get a feel for it, seek out those authors who have websites and newsletters. For us, Natasha Lester is a great example. So you get on their newsletter mailing list and you can see the sorts of things that they are. They might often share news about the book, or about the cover process, or the research that they're doing. So, but I mean, I think to circle back to the question, I mean, again, it's varied. Some people do a lot of social media and really build up their communities. Other authors would do a lot less, and I suppose lean more towards those in-person events and festivals. So
if you're looking to get picked up, so if you are a debut author, how important are those social media platforms? Like, is it, if someone's got 100,000 followers, are you much more likely to pick them up than someone who's got 200?
Again, I'm going to give a vague answer that's going to annoy everyone, but I think it depends. It depends on the book, but I think certainly being connected in the space that you're writing about is helpful. So having connections with other writers might it's not an advantage, but I think it just when we're getting a submission, what we're getting is at face value. So really it's just giving us a bit more of a picture of who you are, and what you're doing outside of your writing. Tell us if you've written pieces of short fiction or poetry to go in journals, if you regularly go to writers' events, or you might even done some hosting of panels, just as much information really as you can share. It is helpful, but again, it's never going to sort of rule somebody out, because that's something, if you're writing in an area, and perhaps more so in the sort of what we would call more commercial fiction, where those authors are delivering and writing and publishing a book every single year, that's also things that authors can learn to do, and start building up their platforms and sharing their content with other authors, to build it. So it's not a case of if you don't have it, you can never have it. So yeah.
Okay. Erin's got a question. She asks, what's the process like at Hachette for upward movement in editorial? Is it common for editorial assistants to move up to junior editors? And if so, what's that transition like?
Yes, good question. Well, actually, one of our editors quite recently, she was a senior editor, got promoted to deputy managing editor. So that has just happened here. So yes, absolutely. If there's an opportunity to promote somebody up as a vacancy comes up, then yes, we would always prefer to do that than having to hire in a new person. And how is the transition? Was that part two of the question? yes, I think it's gone okay so far.
Great. Fabulous. So this is another question about the prize. Maeve asks, what are the most common mistakes made by first-time submitters and what should be avoided? So this sort of goes back to that question we had from Colleen.
I mean, I would say read your work carefully, give it a proofread, give it an edit yourself, really look at your synopsis and make sure that it's clear what you've written and that it flows properly. If you can, give yourself some time away from it once you've written it to go back and review it, because I think usually that's for all of us. If you've written something and you go back the next day, you often think, oh, I could have done that better. So give it a little bit of time, and just try and be as comfortable as you can in what you've submitted.
Right. Another question about the prize. You've touched on this earlier, but are there any particular genres that stand out for you or for judges for the prize? That's a question from John.
I think it's interesting, actually, more so in the what's being entered into the prize, because I think it does lean a little bit more towards literary fiction, and we do get quite a lot of memoir. So within the categories that we're asking for, I would say be sort of don't think that you have to be writing a really literary work to submit to the prize, because you don't at all. But beyond that, no, not really. We'll see what we get each year, and it sort of varies from year to year where how much of one type of writing that we get.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got another question here. This is in relation to submissions to you, to Hachette. Uma asked, what type of edits do you do if you decide to accept a manuscript?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a big question.
It is a big question. Okay, I'll try and give a short format. So basically, I mean, it depends on the book, which is like the standard line for all of my answers so far. But I mean, it can start off being a developmental edit, which is basically, by that time we would have committed that we would have made an offer and we would want to be proceeding with the book. But then there would still be quite a lot of developmental work back and forth between the publisher and the author, so that they can really kind of get the book as good as it actually, as it can be. And sometimes that's about, well, there's something missing here, or there's a jump in the story that doesn't quite make sense, or if it's non-fiction, there's a big chunk of information about something that's not in the book. So you would do that first, and then once you feel that you've got that overall kind of essence of the book right, then we would go into a structural editing process, which is, as the name suggests, is very much about how the book is structured. Does it flow properly? Is everything in the right order? And sometimes that will be with the in-house team. Sometimes that would be a freelancer, and that's quite a robust process. And I'd say for both of those stages, the author has to commit quite a bit of time, because there might be quite extensive rewriting or reworking attached to both of those. And there can be a couple of goes at sometimes, depending on how early the book is, I suppose when the manuscript's first submitted. And then once you've done the structural edit, go to a copy edit, which is much more at a line level, and grammar and syntax, and sometimes fact checking. And then from there it will go into designed pages, and then it will definitely go to a proofreader to basically look at it again on the page. And if it needs a defamation read, at that stage it would go to a lawyer for a defamation read, and there may then be changes that need to be made to it after that as well. So it's quite an intensive process, and that process, we usually say, to allow a minimum of 12 months from a manuscript coming in to publishing it. But some books would take, some would be shorter, but some would be longer as well. So so it's a close relationship between the author and their publisher, and editorial team. So we get to know each other really well.
Yes, I can imagine. What or how much emphasis does Hachette put on comp titles in the submission?
I think it's really helpful if you can, because for us, it immediately gives us a reference point and shows us where you're thinking the book sits and what you compare it to. So I really like that when people give comps.
Is there any kind of guidelines around how to phrase your comp titles? Like, so do you look arrogant if you say you?
No, I think you just say my comps are and then list and list them out.
Yep.
Yeah.
And is it beneficial to use comp titles that are Hachette published or that are Australian?
I mean, if you can give an Australian one, great, but also an overseas one is fine too. Yeah.
Okay. Now we've got a couple.
Someone just asked, what is a comp title? It's a good question.
Sorry.
It's actually saying this book is like that book. So, I always find actually Amazon, if you want to go and if you select a book title and down the bottom and it will say people who bought this book also liked, and it will pop up with a whole, that's quite a handy place to look up, so if you've got a book in your mind that you think it's similar to, that can give you a couple of other ideas as well.
Fiona, we've got a few questions here about specific genres related to the Ritual Prize, and I think you did say to refer to the website.
Yes.
And with your question around autobiography in a prose poetry format, I'm thinking the answer is refer to the website.
Yes, please do, because I don't want to give you the wrong information. It's quite detailed terms and conditions and guidelines. So please just pop onto the EWF site and have a look there.
Oh, just a follow-on question from our comp titles conversation. Abby asks, how recent do comp titles need to be?
I suppose fairly recently is good. Maybe something from the last 3 or 4 years would be my preference.
Okay, and Abby and Shelley have both asked, so I think you've already said refer to the website, but because 2 people have asked, I'm going to proceed with asking. Fiona mentioned that you're currently open for fiction submissions, but the website says you're not. Does that sound?
On the Hachette website?
I think that's
what the question. Just going to have to go and have a look.
I feel like someone from our team can probably paste the submission page and it's going to say, and whatever's on there is probably...
It's probably right, yes. I mean, it just says for information, if you go onto our submission page, which I'm right now, it says we are not looking for science fiction, fantasy, horror, illustrated, cookbooks, poetry, screenplays or academic works at this time. So that's what's on the website, yeah. Historical fiction is fine, to Ian's question below.
Great. We've got another book talk, Bookstagram type question. Someone saying they're brilliant platforms. Do you actually ever send books to reviewers?
Yes, we do. I mean, when we get, there's a couple of ways. I mean, you'll see as well, books when you buy them sometimes have quotes from other authors on them. So that means we've sent out an early proof copy to a number of authors and asked them if they would give us an endorsement quote, and then yes, we would send out quite widely to reviewers, obviously everything from the media, but also to bookstagrammers, bloggers, etc. So yes, we do that a lot.
Yeah. All right, now we'll be wrapping up shortly, so do put your final questions in the chat box if you'd like to ask them. But we do have some more questions here that I would be remiss if I let you go without answering them for us. Let's have a look here. Oh, I have a question. What kinds of books do well in overseas markets? Australian books in overseas markets?
Also a good question. And actually the Australian Council had their Visiting International Publishers program last week, which is something that they run annually. And that's a cohort of publishers from around the world who come to Australia to find out about the market here and our lovely authors. And I think, fiction is probably the most successful. Non-fiction is hard because generally they want somebody, particularly if it's any sort of factual information or advice, they've often got their own experts in their own market. So fiction does do well. Children's books, yes, also. I mean, I think the last couple of years it's been quite hard because there's been that uncertainty. Certainly in countries like the US, they delayed a lot of their publications, which meant that they sort of were left with this sort of huge kind of backlog. So they certainly weren't looking to buy extra books from over here. But it's there is, I think, again, it just is if it hits the right chord with them. Often they like to know what sort of international buzz there's going to be around the book. So, they might want to know if the TV rights have been optioned or film rights. So the bar sort of keeps going up, I suppose, as you look to those other markets, and how often the author might travel to the UK. And the same in translation is really interesting because often they do. For example, there was a lady on that program last week who's from Taiwan, where book talk just is not a thing. She actually has to ask in the panel, what is book talk? I've never heard of this before. So it can be quite a little bit more trend driven. And actually the Dutch market was interesting because so many people now in Holland read the English edition of books. So it's almost negated the need for a Dutch publisher to, they almost see little point in buying the Dutch rights to a book because so many people will read in English. So, but that's why we go to book fairs each year, and where we really sort of pitch our authors and try to encourage that we can get deals overseas. And we also distribute our authors through our Hachette sister companies in the UK and US as well, and throughout Europe, and list the ebooks and audio. So the books still reach those markets, but it's just, in terms of actually getting a local publisher in those markets to take them on, that can be quite challenging.
Fiona, we've had a lot of questions in the chat about specific genres, both that Hachette submit or that could be submitted to the Ritual Prize. I would encourage everyone to go straight to those websites, because that's where you'll get the most accurate and up-to-date information.
Yes.
And unfortunately, we've run out of time, Fiona. It's been such a lovely chat.
Well, it's been lovely. It's been lovely to... I can't see many people. I can only see a few people, but I hope that was useful, and I'm sorry that we've run out of time.
We have indeed. So that is all we have time for today. Thank you so much to our audience for joining us, and a very big thank you to Fiona Hazard for chatting with us today. Our next First Friday event will be on Friday, the 7th of July, with Benjamin Stevenson, author and literary agent. Stay tuned for more information about that. Our newsletter is the best way to stay up to date on our events and courses. And if you haven't heard about our upcoming Speculative Fiction Festival on the 24th of June, tickets are on sale now, so don't miss out. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you at another Writing New South Wales event very soon.